as well. So I brought up your week 3 in Moodle. That way you guys can kind of take a look and see that all of Monday's content is available to you. We're kind of working where it's being done and conducted in real time, but also making it available so you can do this asynchronously as far as the content. So I will always try to do my best to get things up as soon as possible. I did have some issues Monday where my videos were not rendering, and then Spectrum decided to slow my internet down to pretty much that of a snail crawl. And so I had to make phone calls and stuff like that. So if those things do happen, I will always try to give you guys a heads up and be patient with me. And if it really impacts whether or not you're going to be able to get things done on your end on time, like I'll always try to provide extensions if it's that like big of a deal. But also, please know that I'm going to open up the seat availability for these lectures to you as a first come, first served basis. Some students want to do this class completely online, and that's perfectly fine. You're not required to sign up to come to the classes. This is just available to you as that resource. If you're the kind of person that has a real need for that experiential learning, to have contact with other people, to know how these ideas are going about and really feel like you're connected with it, this is here for you for that. If you're really good at being able to do online work, that's perfectly fine too. So I've made at the bottom of this week available the sign-up sheets, and you can go to both classes so long as a seat is available in the sign-up sheet. Sign up for them. They will close by the time Wednesday's class comes up, so you have at any point in time the availability to make that decision for yourself from now until next Wednesday. So just know that that's kind of what's going on as far as those things go. Did anybody have, who viewed the lecture for Monday, did anybody have issues kind of navigating through the way it was structured? No? Okay. And also remember that we have that Belmont report form that's going to be due Sunday. And it really is to kind of get you guys to conceptualize what it is whenever we're talking about ethics and why it's such an important facet to research. So some of you have already posted to it. Continue to look through it, look at the other posts, see what's kind of going on. And in the meantime, if you do have questions, I'm here to answer any of your questions while we're face-to-face in class. But you can always send me an email if another question arises later. Okay? So let's get started. We're going to pick up on on Monday's lecture, and we had left off on what is called the IRB, or the Internet Institutional Review Board. And this is not something that you guys are going to have to do because this is like a student structured style research project. But later on, if you ever end up wanting to get into anthropology, which I can't imagine anybody not wanting to, I've obviously made a profession of it, but these are in place to be held, to make sure that you're held accountable for your ethical duties as a researcher. So usually a board is put together and they kind of help you along those pathways. Sometimes, we can definitely see just through our own mind's eye any type of ethical dilemmas that might arise in research, but sometimes those perspectives are only within one single mind. So whenever you have a bunch of heads working together to help you along, that becomes very useful. And so they approve, they monitor, they do all of the things that would need to be reviewed for any biomedical or human behavioral research involving humans. So the next thing when it comes to our ethical responsibilities is to engage in honest scholarship. And so I do take these things very seriously because of the fact that, we have that duty to those we share this information with to provide sound research. So researchers are subject to general moral rules as far as scientific and scholarly conduct. This means do not deceive, misrepresent, fabricate evidence, plagiarize. And I know that whenever you're kind of first getting started in terms of what constitutes plagiarism, what doesn't, because we draw from a lot of other people's information, it's just a way to give credit to those who've done that work before you. It's just to be like, hey, this is not my own work. This is work that I understand is out there, that I'm using as an example to demonstrate my point, and here's who did it. So at any point in time, if you find yourself in a moment where you're like, okay, I would like to be able to include this in some of my assignments, how can I do that? Please reach out to me and I'll help you through that. That's just if you're going through and you're like, okay, well, I want to be able to provide the historical background of how this particular microculture came into being, and they have a whole website and all that kind of stuff. If you want to just kind of include that as part of it or information from it, let me know, and then I can kind of walk you guys through how to reference that person who wrote it up, and be like, I did not just somehow know how this began. I got this information from somewhere. So always have, and fabricating evidence. Since you're working through online social media platforms, there's no reason to fabricate any evidence. You don't have to make anything up. It's already there available to you at your fingertips. You can always be able to screenshot, find things, and kind of contribute to your research through those avenues. So also never prevent the reporting of misconduct from others. If you do see somebody who's in the research arena and they're doing any of these things, it is your duty to make sure that it is not prevented from the reporting of any of that conduct. There are certain responsibilities that you will have, but I don't think you would have to really worry about that for this class, okay? Just know that it is there. And do not obstruct the scientific or scholarly research of others. And so sometimes, especially like in future research, if you ever get into that, some people get very competitive about their research. But this information is to contribute to the whole. It is to help push forward research and science and scholarly thought processes that will be shared and disseminated to future generations. So even whenever there are people that are competitive about it, they usually are like, oh no, I can still share my information with you guys because it is a part of our ethical duty to do so. The next one is the preservation of sites. Now, you won't be going to a physical site, but just know that oftentimes researchers in the field have to be able to preserve their sites so that other future researchers can come back and still be able to conduct their studies. So in more of a cerebral context or within social media platforms, the preservation of sites, if you're representing Southeast Missouri State University as a student and you go on there and you become the troll or you're harassing other people or anything like that, and finally people are like, you know what, you need to leave. You are not allowed to continue doing your study here. That also sets the precedent for other students in the future that might need to do an ethnographic research project from Southeast and be like, oh, well, there's another student coming along. I remember that last one who really was rude and did not, adhere to our rules or anything like that. And so it'll keep other students from being able to conduct their research. So always represent yourself, represent your institution, and know that you're doing this on behalf of people you haven't even met before. So, anthropological researchers must do all they can to preserve the opportunities for future fieldwork to follow. And always try to leave a place in, if not the same, but better condition than you came before it. So when I say this, I have to try to always draw from resources from my own experience. If I was at an archaeological site and I was staying in the graces of another host, I always try to make sure that I did not trash the place, that I did not make it harder for them to be at. But even more so when I'm at a site, preservation in an underwater archaeological context is a big thing because at some point in time you have to try to preserve whatever it is that you found there. And we've done it through various different avenues, whether we put sandbags there to cover up a shipwreck so that in the future it's still being preserved under the right conditions, and other researchers can come back, uncover it, and then continue the work. So that's kind of a physical standpoint, like I said, with your microcultures on a social media platform. That could just be in your behavior. An example of really bad anthropological practices, and this is probably why everybody's all like, why does Indiana Jones get to be the poster boy for anthropology? Because he is quite possibly the worst representation of anthropological practices. That man, if you've watched any of the movies, ends up destroying every single place he actually visits. It's not even just like, oh, a site. He goes into a room and he leaves and it's blown up. So this is the worst example. So always try not to blow up your sites either. If you ever go to a physical place, if you're actually doing an ethnographic work instead of just ethnographic works, don't blow things up. Also share your results. So you could be embarking on this great study, and then if you just keep the information to yourself, then it's almost like it never happened. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, does it actually happen? It's kind of like one of those philosophical thought processes. So disseminating that information in an appropriate manner is really contextual. In this case, you guys are going to continue doing your study about your microcultures online, and then by the end of the semester, you will produce a final report. Now, last semester, it was really kind of odd because I had students going into a physical place that suddenly we were faced with this pandemic and had to shut it down. So it really gave us a very unique perspective on what it was like to actually go through such a transitional phase in social climates. And they had to kind of report with that. We got really flexible with it and really start to observe how these things were changing the way that we lived. And I had some students who really produced some great work, and we archived them in Kent Library. This way, other students 20 years in the future could go back and read their reports and be like, this is what it was like for them to live through this time. So that was an appropriate way to share that information, to disseminate it. But you'll also have an opportunity to present various phases of your work. So we'll figure out how we're going to do that, if it's going to be like in a video presentation style, or if you guys are going to have the opportunity just to share it. It'll be kind of like the steps where we'll be like, okay, what's your site? What have you kind of learned about it? What do you think about it? But these will be done in step-by-step processes so that it does not become this overwhelming thing. So I'll guide you guys through that. And also sharing of data. Data is, of course, different than your results. The data that you end up accumulating is really through your observations. And in that, for other researchers, it could be in another form. And there is ways that researchers end up depositing their data or their results into digital repositories. But those things are available. Just know they exist. So anthropological research should always provide access to the data of their materials. That way people can always check and be like, hey, I see that your data is either sound, or there's a couple of issues with it, or maybe I found something else, or I can match it with my data and produce something entirely new. So we should make every effort to ensure the preservation of data and for the use of other scholars. There's a responsibility to the public as well. So our responsibility to the public makes our results available to them, but we need to be careful. And I'll talk about the caveats to this here in a second. So use your information for advocacy. You may find something really, really important about the social aspects of virtual sites, virtual social media platforms that could really help contribute to its development, especially as we develop ways to communicate with each other that are less chaotic. I kind of feel like there's a lot of social media in which chaos just runs rampant. The etiquette kind of goes to the wind, and people become a lot more pronounced in the way that they want to express their viewpoints in a way that they probably wouldn't have done it in a face-to-face setting. But it's still developing, and you might be able to find what it is that causes these mechanisms to happen. So being able to disseminate that to the public in a responsible way is a very important thing too. So sponsors, students, decision makers, non-anthropologists might come across a researcher's work, like an ethnography, and try to use it in order to help make legislation or to help fund their projects or whatever it is. That information may become useful. So we have to have some caveats to that whenever we're talking about the dissemination of information. So being truthful, of course, that's a given. Be truthful. Factual content, there are social and political implications that come along with research as that research is used for whoever's agenda. Really making sure that your findings are properly contextualized and responsibly utilized is something that's important, but you can't always have control over that. And when I say this, I can give you guys an example. There was an anthropologist who went to the Philippines and decided to do a study, particularly on this woman who lived in northern Luzon in a very remote region of the mountains, who was the last practicing tattoo artist of the area, of the entire Philippines, which the type of tattooing that they did were the tapping, you'd have the stick and you'd do the tapping, right? So she was maybe at the time 92 years old. Nobody else in the Philippines does this practice anymore because it was outlawed. Through Spanish colonialization and various other regimes that had taken over the Philippines, tattooing was outlawed, and it was very much a part of their culture and their society, and they were badges of honor. Women wore them to show their rank. Men wore them to show their military. They were like military badges, you know? And when the Spanish came there, they first looked at the inhabitants of the Philippines, especially in the central Philippines, and were like, oh my gosh, they're wearing pants. They must be sophisticated. As they became closer and closer to their islands and could see the people, they were like, wait a minute, those are not pants, they're tattoos. Like, they were completely covered in them. Now it's almost completely wiped out. So this anthropologist goes and he wants to do this study on this woman and ask her questions and really know what it is, the meaning of these various different tattoos. Some of them are for protection. They call them antings, and it's to keep them safe during various periods of time, and it, you know, truly ingrained. Very interesting stuff. So whenever he published his findings, it became a fad. It became like this tourist attraction where people would come searching for this woman to get one of the very last potentially dying art forms tattooed onto their bodies. But what happened as a byproduct of that is that tourists are often very careless about the environments that they leave behind. And so this village became completely overrun with bottles of water, just used bottles of water strewn throughout everywhere. And they don't have recycling centers in these places, you know? They don't have that. So these people just kind of left their trash in the wake. But even more so, they started paying her for this service that was really kind of something that was held sacred in their village. So they began exploiting her. Then after they began exploiting her, the government decided to make her into a sideshow as well. And they're like, all right, well, we're going to put you on display, essentially, and you're going to tattoo these people. She had to tattoo over 400 people in a period of time. She was, I think, 95 at that point, you know? And while she's growing with this fame and all this other stuff, at some point in time, you have to kind of think, this anthropologist that really just thought that this was a unique thing and wanted to preserve it through literature and through ethnography, because we don't know how long she's going to be on this earth, ended up really harming this village and this woman. I mean, she still continues on. She's now like teaching her grandchildren how to do this, but there were real world impacts that ended up happening as a byproduct of this study. So whenever we talk about these caveats and sharing and dissemination, while he had no idea that this would have happened, you know, in a good faith effort, we have to learn from these moments and be like, all right, how is it that this could happen to a person or a village due to my actions? And we can't always predict it, but we should always try to make that effort. So apparent bases for empirical findings, we always got to make sure that we make these things apparent. How did we find this information? How did we obtain this information? And be able to make sure that others know how to accumulate that information as well. And then to be candid about our qualifications or philosophical ideologies or political biases. Because if so long as you write that in there and be like, hey, this does come from a perspective that I have within this, making it known, at the very least will allow your reader to know, okay, there are these particular standpoints, there are these ideological views, but they're at least stating it so that I can be aware of this, that I'm not being tricked into being converted into something. And identifying the limitations of someone's expertise, right? As an anthropologist, I've done some field studies on cultures, but I'm an archaeologist. And even more so, I'm an underwater archaeologist. And if you want to ask me about anything about underwater archaeology, I'm your gal. If it goes to another level of anthropological research where you're wanting me to espouse my ideas about some tribal community in South America that I have nothing and no idea about, I'm going to be like, I don't know. It's my responsibility to say, I don't know. These are my limitations. Here's what I'm an expert in. Here's what I'm not an expert in. So here's my opinion, you know? Do no harm to the people with whom you work or other colleagues. Responsibility to students and trainees. Now, I mentioned this in Monday's lecture, that while I'm standing here and telling you what these things are, it's your responsibility to know what these things are. That way you know and can identify if it's being violated. Do not discriminate. Whoever it is that is teaching you or giving you this perspective on research should not be discriminating. We shouldn't be like, oh, well, I'm going to favor one person over the other when in regards to this. I should be able to disseminate this information and help guide you guys on a one-to-one basis. Hopefully we have it a little bit more availability due to the sizes of these classes, that I can be like, all right, here, let me help you. I shouldn't be like, well, I like this person better, so I'm just going to help them. Sorry, good luck with the rest of your stuff, to someone else. That would be irresponsible of me. So that kind of ties into being a good teacher. Now, that's relative and subjective to people's definitions of what good is, but to always at least try to see if whoever's teaching this kind of stuff is trying at least. Obligation to teach ethics. This is my obligation to you guys, to teach you the ethics before you proceed into any type of research. Give credit where credit is due. There are some researchers that are like, oh, okay, here's a student, they have this great idea. They should give that student the credit for the idea instead of being like, oh, no, that's my idea, because that's a lie. It's unethical. And to never engage in activity that would create a conflict of interest or compromise the academic integrity of a student. And that often, as you get into the adult world, if you're off and you're doing some sort of research in a field and you have your mentor or somebody who's guiding your research, and there's kind of this quid pro quo proposal of, if you do this, I do this, whatever. That's compromising your academic integrity, and there's a conflict of interest in that, and you should be able to identify it. All right, so Journal 2 assignments. I'm just going to quickly go over it. Hopefully, have you guys read through what the Journal 2 assignment entails? I'll do it really quickly. The instructions are to refer to your list of potential field sites. What is your leading candidate for the field site for the semester-long project? And in a free form style, you don't have to apply APA for this. In fact, you will not have to apply APA formatting until week 4. To week 4's ethnographic assignment. So before that, you guys are doing okay with the little worksheets that I've been giving out. So in a free-form journal-style method, briefly describe the chief advantages of your online site as you see it, and how you plan to make the most of the advantage and the greatest of the challenges, overcome the greatest challenges from your online site, and how you plan to address it. Okay, so this is kind of just really conceptualize and take into consideration the ethical implications of various things, and write it out. That way you can kind of give yourself a crude mental roadmap of how you're going to navigate these next few weeks of your research. Your online site selection, choose your preferred option. You guys have probably teased it down to this point of which one that you're really kind of thinking that you're drawn to. Rate your characteristics. There is a worksheet that will be available to you. Just click on it and fill that out, and that's what you're going to be turning in, okay? And it should guide you through the various different characteristics that you're going to need to rate. You're going to need to evaluate if that site meets those criteria and is the best one for you. Under Moodle, assignment 3, you'll find it. There's going to be the version EA3 without form controls. That's what it's going to say. That's what you download. That's what you fill out. and have it submitted by Sunday. It should not be a very challenging one for you to work through. Okay, so let's move on really quick.
How do we know when you graded the ethnographic?
Oh, ethnographic too. Okay, so I'm still playing catch up. I'm going to try to have them graded. I'll try to have them graded by tonight. I'll try to get those things done and squared away because it should be pretty straightforward. I don't think that a lot of you guys are completely off of the concept of what we're going for. So I'll try to have that out. Then you guys just pick one, and it's pretty easy to go through that worksheet and just be like, that's the one I want. But then after that, you're committed to it, okay?
Yeah, I just meant, like, is there something that shows, like, where we turn it in that they were improved? Or will you, like, leave a comment, like, those aren't really good? Or do we see that one?
Oh, like for feedback?
Yeah, like, how do we know that you approved it? I guess I'm asking.
Oh, I'll just announce it and be like, hey, you guys are graded.
Okay, and then we just go to, like, the grade.
Mhm.
Okay.
If I'm not able to get it taken care of within the next 24 hours, I may give an extension for the next one, even though that one really, like, it should be relatively straightforward, but I may give an extension just so that we can all kind of get back onto the same page. Okay?
Yeah, I just didn't know if you would be like, hey, these field sites aren't good.
Oh, I'll give you feedback if those field sites are not.
Okay.
Yeah, so it will say, like, once I have it graded, you're going to get a notification that it's been graded. And then there's, like, a feedback section where I'll be like, hey, really try to figure out maybe an alternative or something along those lines. I'll try to be as specific as possible so that you can really kind of keep your pace up.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay. So for today's next task that we're going to do is discuss important concepts. And real quick, I'll give you an overview of what we're going to try to cover before the club. Can I get a time check? Do you know what time it is?
It's
1:28, you guys. 11:28. Okay, so we got some time. So the important concepts that we're going to try to go over, and the reason why we're going to go over them now, and hopefully, we can complete it. If not, we'll bleed into next week, because I have an activity that we're going to try to do that entails watching one of my favorite shows that really deconstructs kind of some of these concepts, and we're going to be able to identify them. That way, you guys can be equipped with being able to identify various things within your microculture that apply to these concepts. So first we'll discuss culture. We'll talk about tacit culture. We'll talk about explicit culture. We'll talk about, of course, we'll scheme over the ethnography because we really kind of touched on it a lot in the past couple of weeks. But we'll discuss what naive realism is, ethnocentrism, and what informants are, because you're going to be interacting with some informants a lot throughout the semester. Oh, I'm going to go over this because we did it. But remember rule number 1, and I think I talked about this in the first 2 weeks video lectures, that for rule number 1, wherever it is that you're deciding to do your observations for your microculture, if you can, learn it and observe from a resting place. And when I say that, set aside, carve out some time each week, a couple of hours, if not more, to sit down and observe your virtual sites, okay? That means see what type of activity is coming about, what kind of is going on, really try to evaluate it. And when I say this, I'll give you an example of what would have been a perfect microculture for me to examine for the purposes of this course. Usually every day I take a couple of minutes, and this is on Facebook, and it really is so specific that it is one person that I know who posts, and it's kind of like political stuff or things that are kind of going on in the local area. He'll post up, and it's very neutral. He'll be like, okay, so this is what's going on. What do you think about this? A, do you agree, or B, do you disagree? And people over time have jumped in on this thread, and they're right here from Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and they jump in on this thread and they either post a very short, yes, I agree, or no, I don't agree. Some of them elaborate. I've noticed over a period of time that there are always the same players that are involved. Some of them have opposing views from one another, and they go back and forth. And I'm sitting here watching it in real time, and you kind of get this understanding about the social climate here in Cape Girardeau just based on this one thread from this one guy who consistently posts every single day a neutral standpoint, like where he just asks the question and people get involved with it. And it really kind of gives me an understanding, especially while we were living through this pandemic on lockdown, how everybody was functioning and feeling during that particular period in time. And some of them were getting really, like, some of them got heated, where I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like Days of Our Lives. Like, in real time, I can watch them posting, and they're getting mad, and they're calling each other names, and he has to play mediator. And I was just like, wow, this really is a reflection of social attitudes right now. People are divided. People are angry. People are scared, you know? And it was just off this one guy's posts, off of like his threads, that he does it every single day. And I kind of look and I check it out and I see, oh, so-and-so has posted again. And I'm like kind of a fan of one of them, you know, where I'm all like, I like the way you write. I like the way that you're saying. I don't always agree, but I kind of like them. I'm all like, I'm going to friend you on Facebook. I've never even met this person before, but I'm just all like, you have something to say and I enjoy it, you know? Whereas some people I'm all like, oh my God, I hope I never meet you in real life. I'm like, I don't think that you and I would get along. And I never participate in it. I just watch. It's kind of just my like little entertainment to see what's kind of going on. And so that is an example of a microculture. It could be as small as that. It could be one person's continuous like posts and people that respond to it consistently. It could be something along those lines. But always try to do it from a resting place. Just carve out that time. You know, try not to be like doing multiple things at one period in order to observe this, because it can get really entertaining if you pay close attention. So, definitions of culture. Whatever you have to write on right now, take a moment, and I'm going to give you guys just a couple of minutes to think and write what you feel is your definition of culture. Because everybody has a different definition. There are so many anthropologists, there's so many people that have put out there their definitions of culture. And I want you guys to kind of think about what culture means to you. And then also be prepared to take a moment and share it so that we can kind of see where everybody's at as far as what culture means. There are no right or wrongs on this one, but just take a moment. Okay, so who amongst you is going to be my brave soul and share first their definition of what they feel culture is? Go ahead.
As the experiences, lifestyle, and tradition that define a particular group.
And that define what?
That define a particular group.
Hey, that's pretty good. That is pretty good. Anybody else want to share one? Yes.
So I put, it's the basis of norms and rules that we follow in our day-to-day life, as well as it's changing over time, which include how we dress, talk, interact, and socialize with one another.
Heck yeah. You guys are actually pretty good at this. I remember when I was in your all's shoes, I was like, I don't know. Isn't it something in a petri dish? Did you have one?
Yeah, I said it's the actions, values, activities, beliefs, style, and overall way of life developed collectively by a community or society within specific classical.
Have you guys taken anthropology classes before? How many of you have taken an anthropology class? All right. Well,
2
geography classes?
Yeah.
Nice.
I did everything else as well.
Okay, cool. So we kind of have a familiarized idea of these definitions, right? So I'm going to show you one of the very first definitions, the one that was actually made explicit in the early days of anthropology. And that definition was very wordy, And it was culture or civilization taken in its wide ethnographic sense is that complex whole in which includes knowledge, belief, arts, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So E.B. Tyler apparently just thought men were the only ones within a member of society. No, just kidding. At that point in time in history, that was an all-inclusive description, but we now know that that is not as inclusive by today's standards. We usually use human beings, right? Human beings, because it's not just men that have culture. Definitions of culture. So this is E.B. Tyler, early armchair anthropologist, but had a lot to do with some pretty great pioneering thoughts that were not really articulated at the time. So he pioneered the field of anthropology around the early stages of the 1900s. The 1800s revolutionary idea that he really is responsible for is that there is a difference between culture and biology. And the problem is that at that point in time, people thought that biology and culture there was no difference as far as what we inherited in terms of characteristics. So Tyler pointed out that there is a propensity for living in a highly complex structured society was acquired through a process of learning rather than through inheritance. A great example of this was there was a period in time where these thoughts really had an impact on people's lives, that those who were in authority could really change the course of your life because they thought that how you behaved was inherited from your parents. And so there was a case in which a woman became sterilized because she was the daughter of a prostitute. And they really wanted to eradicate loose morals and behaviors. And so they're like, well, you're the daughter of a prostitute, therefore you will likely become a prostitute as well. And we need to sterilize you so that you don't produce more prostitutes.
Sorry, that's not fun.
No, but I mean, for real, we think about that. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But it had very profound applications to her life. She was not able to have children of her own, not by her choice. And that's chilling. So people who begin to have this voice in anthropology that are pointing out, no, you don't inherit this behavior biologically. These are things that are learned and can be unlearned. And that can change the way that we live our lives. That can change the way people apply how you live your life. So it's a big deal. So thank you, E.B. Tyler, for sure. But let's get a little bit more concise about these definitions of culture. So another one that we had was culture is, in an anthropological sense, a shared and negotiated system of meaning informed by knowledge that people learn and put into practice by interpreting and generating behavior. Still a little wordy. I like to get a bit concise whenever it comes to definitions because then I can remember it. But it's getting better. So let's tease out a couple of other things that are in it. So we can see that we can agree, at least, that culture is something that is shared. That it is a negotiated system because at the minimum, two people or two parties have to agree on what something means. That they understand that this particular thing, this particular behavior means the same thing. And that it has meaning behind it. We put meaning into things. Things are just what they are, but unless we infuse it and layer it with those meanings, it could mean completely different things. Okay, so when I'm saying this, I'll use an example. So, in terms of letters, they're symbols, correct? So, this one symbolizes what? You guys can all see it. Can you see it? That's correct. It is the letter A. Can we all at least agree this is the letter A?
Yeah.
We can agree to that. But without us understanding that it symbolizes something, what would it be? It would mean nothing. You're right. It would mean absolutely nothing unless we all agreed what it meant. So we layer meaning onto things, and we have to agree. Then, of course, this is the type of knowledge that is acquired. It's something that we learn, right? We learn this kind of stuff. Somebody taught you that symbolized A. I don't know if it was in kindergarten class, but I remember them telling me this is A. I'm all like, A. What sound does it make? A. You know? You kind of are taught from a very early age these symbols. And we put them into practice through interpretation, and we use that interpretation to generate our own behaviors. So we have a couple of things that are laced within this definition of culture that we could probably use and apply into a more concise form. So we know that culture is shared, we know that it's learned, we know that it is knowledge, and that people use it to interpret the behavior of others and then generate their own behavior in response. And wherever it is that you are, depending on what culture you're familiar with, it will change. Has anybody been to another country? Yes? So, share with me really quick. What country? What is it?
I've gone to a couple.
You've gone to a couple. Okay. Go to the most recent.
Most recent was, so I was studying in Spain this past year. And so their way of behavior is totally, completely different from like living here in the States. It's normal. So, well, okay, so like over there it's normal behavior for you to be late to things, to be not early at all.
Mm-hmm.
If you're early, you're like, okay, you're not from here.
Mm-hmm.
It's normal to go out and drink and party Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all week long.
All week
Go
long.
party all week.
All week long, it's okay to party. What here? Okay, let's really kind of tease out the differences here. What days are really kind of the appropriate days to party here in the U.S.? Thursday through Saturday. Thursday through Saturday. We don't do Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Sundays. I don't know. Back when I was in college, we had Sunday Fun Day. And that usually started with a breakfast beverage. If you hadn't stopped from the night before. But we don't do that anymore because, right, we're very responsible students, upstanding citizens. This is a dry campus. We would never. Wink, right? We would never do that. And in fact, I'm pretty sure whenever this job was offered to me, one of the questions that I asked when they were like, hey, would you mind teaching a couple classes? My question after returning from Australia was, is it still a dry campus? Because in Australia, drinking attitudes are completely different. I would have beers with my professor. After the class would get out, they'd be like, okay, we'll meet you in the bar that is right next to the library. And they will buy you a beer because you're a broke college student. Actually, they bought us pitchers, you know. And you sat there and you drank a beer with them. Would you do that here? No. It's almost like odd trying to be like, there's this, you know, relationship that is so different. Completely different in another country,
There's
right?
also first name basis.
First name basis.
Over there, they want you to call them by their first name.
Exactly.
Not even by their titles.
Why?
Doctor or anything.
And why is that?
It was kind of in my class, in the classes I was in, it was because they wanted to be like on a first name basis due to like to make sure that it was comfortable in order to engage and interact in class and outside of class.
Yeah. And where was it? This was Spain?
Yes.
Okay, same thing in Australia. And we're going to get a little bit more into that because this is a really good example whenever we start talking about tacit and explicit culture. So let's bookmark that one so that we can use it as an example because it's really good. So for culture, that's what it is. For definitions of culture, what's my time? Oh, man. Okay, so just know that for our definition of culture in this class, it is knowledge that is learned and shared and that people use to generate behavior and interpret experiences. You can find this in the textbook on page 5 for the definition of culture. We're going to stop here for now, and then we'll pick it up on Monday, and we'll really kind of start talking more about this tacit and explicit and use those examples about titles and how they're applied in different countries and why we do it. And so we'll give some comparative anecdotes to be able to really start to develop these ideas of the concepts that we're going to discuss and that we're hopefully going to try to apply in our writing. Okay? Do you all have any questions so far?
Are you from Australia or are you from Spain?
I was born in St. Louis. I grew up in Colorado for 20 years of my life. I came out here and I've lived here intermittently for almost 20 years. But I did do my graduate work in Australia. So I lived and I worked in Australia for a few years, and then I also did a lot of my research in the Philippines. So I lived in the Philippines for a year as well. So I've kind of been around to different places.
Is that what you meant, that there was a reason why you lived in a tent?
You heard that?
I was wondering because after you told us on Monday, I was like, wait, so is that the reason why? Since you were doing your graduate work?
Yes. So I was there in Australia. A number of series events led to this moment where I was all like, it's just cheaper, especially because Australia is really expensive. Like, a case of beer there is $50.
50?
Mm-hmm. But a 6-pack is $25. So, and then paying for rent and trying to travel around was becoming, I either had to figure out a way to do both or just choose one. So I opted to live in a tent because they have caravan parks everywhere. And I could pick up and put my tent into my Jeep and travel from one side of Australia to the next, depending on where I needed to go, what I needed to do, and still do my schoolwork. So I decided for the tent instead of an apartment.
What's the minimum wage?
Minimum wage is $18 minimum wage. But things are also expensive. So you got to kind of trade it off. It's a trade-off, and it's expensive. A pint of beer was $15. What did I do? Did all I do there was drink? That's all I have. I'm all like, booze. It's a part of their culture, so it was really kind of an aspect that stuck with me. Anyway, so once again, if you guys want to sign up for Monday and Wednesday, so long as there are seats available, feel free to do so, okay? And I will see you next week.